Hello, today is Wednesday, January 10th, and this is the SIG Cluster Lifecycle breakout meeting, or office hours, whatever you want to call it, regarding high availability, self-hosting, and upgrades. I added a couple of things to the agenda item to talk about today, and we might sprawl out from there. One of the topics that we discussed in the last SIG Cluster Lifecycle meeting was the notion that in order for us to get to GA, we don't necessarily have to have high availability thought out as a turnkey solution, so long as the documentation is all in place. And we have a start on some of the documentation that exists there, but I'm looking for takers to follow up on potentially addressing some of the other known constraints, especially regarding upgrades, right? So that is a piece that has been missing from the documentation. There's a document that exists for how we do, how you can, and there's multiple installers too, how you can do high availability, but looking for people who could potentially contribute docs with regards to, and use cases with how to do upgrades for HA. Anybody? Bueller?
And this is just for kubeadm 10?
Yes, it's specifically geared around kubeadm high availability stuff for leveraging existing kubeadm installs for HA and having the upgrade instructions be present there. We have the installation instructions for how to use it, and we will eventually have a much more turnkey solution. And some of this we'll go into in the next bit when we talk about some of the work that Fabrizio has been doing. But for the time being, in order for us to get to GA, we want to at least have everything documented.
In that Google Docs document that I created about HA and kubeadm, there's eventually going to be some information about upgrades, because that's definitely something that I have to look into for my work, and I'm going to document that there. But obviously somebody has to take it over to the well, official kind of documentation that Jamie started doing.
Yes. What I can do, and which I probably should have done before this meeting, is to log an issue for this in the kubeadm repo, and I'll take that as an action item after this meeting, and then point to the docs of where folks can PR against it, and list it out as one of the follow-on items that folks can work on. And it would be helpful if folks who are doing this and have to go through the process anyway could help take a look over the docs and potentially add, an update to Jamie's existing document.
Hey, Tim, I'm obviously willing to help where possible, but in terms of signing up for it, I don't think I'm going to have the cycles at this point.
Okay. Well, I don't think we're going to hit GA for kubeadm until at least 1.11. So this is a long pull type of thing. I think as we start to socialize it, I'll have it as one of the follow-on items and kind of repeat it over and over again. And as people eventually have cycles, being able to take a look at it and contribute is useful. So what you'll probably find me doing over the course of 1.10 and 1.11 is repeating myself over and over again regarding some PRs and issues. So that's probably the first item. The second thing I want to talk about with regards to HA is some of the work that Fabrizio has done. I don't know if people have had a chance to take a look at it at all, but it's good stuff, Fabrizio, and I know he's on the call. If you want to provide some links to the stuff that you had sent a while ago, so other folks, now that everybody's back in the new year, so other folks can take a look at it. I sent an email response to your original prototype, and I don't see any reason why we can't start to feature gate some prototypes for people to tinker around with. I don't know if people have thoughts or feelings about that, but I thought the workflow that you created for your prototype was actually kind of nice and clean. So, and allow for other people to tinker with it. Did you want to talk to it at all, Fabrizio?
Two things about it. Can you hear me? Because I'm traveling, there is some noise.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Two things. First of all, I managed to pass conformance with Sonoboys, so the solution seems working pretty well. And then I will transform my prototype into a PR where the people can look at it. And second, I will put into the PR all the evidence limitation that I found out working on this prototype, and we will see if those limitations are acceptable or not to make this PR become something under FeatureGate.
Okay, do you have maybe a time frame for that PR coming in flight? This week, next week? Fabrizio?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said, do you have a time frame for when you'll have the PR up? Well, I'll follow up with Fabrizio on chat then and try to fill in the details there. For those who aren't in the know about Fabrizio's prototype, we've been discussing for a long time about how we expect the kubeadm workflow to kind of work for joining masters. And this is a prototype with regards to how you would join masters to an existing cluster. And there's some gotchas and details there, like how do you deal with secrets and everything else. And that is part of what we'll have to address with the PR. So I'm sure there will be comments and details forthcoming pretty soon. But the workflow, when I watched your workflow and took a look at it, looked nice. I liked it a lot. I did have some thoughts on it, but I totally don't remember what they were now because it was a while ago. But the idea is basically just have like a very simple command like join and then having a master. So that way as a new master comes online, it will join up and then transfer the certs and secrets over. So are there any other topics regarding high availability that folks wanted to talk about or address? Yes, no? I'll take that as a no.
I have a topic about high availability because I was looking at the PR that Jamie is preparing on the doc site about
Yes.
how to achieve high availability. And in that PR, Jamie is using as advertised address for all the masters the load balancer EP.
Yes.
And I was wondering if this is the right solution, because if we do this, for instance, we will have that all the controller manager and all the pods that goes through the Kubernetes service will go out from the cluster, pass through the load balancer, and then hit an API server.
Yes, that is the default configure. Go ahead.
Why, for instance, if I look at Kubernetes the hard way, in that thing, a specific advertised address for each master, and then controller manager and scheduler talk to the local API server via local hosts.
So there's a couple ways we can do this. The default configuration, I mean, this is the problem where high availability becomes fractal. And we have, at some point in time, we need to just like document one way of doing this. The way that Jamie had documented is the well-trodden path between multiple implementations. And there, ideally in the future, we have discussed the idea of potentially having something like Envoy as a sidecar to all of the components in the system so that it could talk to localhost and then just resolve the load balancing of the masters through Envoy. Like, and there's multiple ways that you could do this. You could use some local redirector. We've had that document that talked about creating a bootstrap proxy. There's all of, like I said before, it becomes fractal. So the Jamie's document was meant to be one well-established pattern that we can iterate on. And then eventually, inside of kubeadm, we would try to distill down a opinionated solution that we consider to be the best practice over time. So I know that OpenShift does this configuration. I'm pretty sure COPS does a very similar configuration. So, I mean, it's just a well-trodden path that folks have taken.
Because if this is an acceptable path and we want to support this simplify the implementation for the HA, because you don't have to manage different address, different certificates, and different and also self-hosting became more simple.
It is.
So,
it's one of the simpler configurations, and that's the reason why we documented it. But I don't know. There's been this long-standing model that has existed, and Ilya, you can chime in here too. That came originally from Luke. That the edict was that eventually, ideally, we would be able to provide a turnkey solution from kubeadm that didn't have a dependency on external facilities such as cloud provider load balancers.
Yeah, that's right. It's just sort of like anything that is considered external, right? Yeah, that's the idea at least. And anything that is external requires more stuff to do with like how it's created and such, right? So that's the kind of place where COPS come in, or whatever tool you use to manage your cloud provider resources. Right? Yeah, but like, I mean, I'm trying to understand what this Fabrizio is suggesting to just sort of, because I mean, like one way we could think of it is that we just assume that let's say you have 3 masters and all of them have static IPs, and we just create a cert with all of those IPs and give everybody a list of those IPs, and there may be a load balancer in front of it for convenience, let's say for external access, but that is separate, right? I mean, that could be one way to look at it. And I mean, for internally, you don't have to go through the load balancer. I think the only kind of cornerstone is that API server count flag, and I still don't understand why we haven't got rid of it. And yeah, so that kubeconfig only supports one API server. That's also a thing. Yeah. Like other than that, the kind of like the fact that whether there is a load balancer or there isn't seems somewhat secondary in a way.
Yes. The real point is that is that the internal communication of the cluster will go out through the proxy and then kick in again. This is the only point that I think that we have to be aware. Or simply decide that we document that we go into this direction because it's simpler to achieve.
Yes, I think as long as we articulate, I think Jamie put a good clause at the top of the document that this is like one of many ways to implement this. So, as long as we're pretty explicit that says here are some of the trade-offs and there's other possible solutions that exist here, I think that's totally fine. And what we might want to do is expand on Jamie's document to say what are the other proposed ideas that we've had over time, because there's many of them, right? And ideally, this is just a document. And then over time, as we add your feature gated work in Fabrizio, we can start to distill down some of the other bits that we've been talking about for a long time now, right?
Makes sense.
Okay, so I will simplify my prototype that now use the other way around. So one different address for each API server. And simplifying I simplify this, clean up the code, and then I put the PR.
That sounds great. Lee, you added some things to the agenda. Want to go through it?
Yeah. Here, let me like Lucas's issue here real quick. So Peter Zhao commented on my etcd TLS PR, noting that the cert rotation was missing. Wasn't really informed that this was even a feature. I didn't know that this was supported on upgrade. But basically, like Lucas describes kind of in this issue, that the mechanism is supposed to, on upgrade, if the certs are old enough, move them out into a backup directory and then run kubeadm phase certs to regenerate things. And it's done as a post-upgrade task. It seems like this was a feature that kind of is just supposed to patch the fact that we didn't think about certs rotation. Linked in this issue is
it's not that we didn't think about certs rotation. We definitely have. It's that it's thorny as hell is the problem. So like ideally, if you did the operator, then you could automatically do cert rotation internally, but secrets aren't secret. So then it becomes weird, right?
Yeah, I guess my question is like the CLI doesn't have any consideration that gives the user this kind of like manual ability to do this.
We could always add that as a constraint though too. Like we could add a command, and I think there was a modification that Moyer made, if I recall correctly, to make cert generation rotation easier, but it's not. I have to dig up what it is.
Yeah, I think like pretty much if the certs aren't there, then and the CA is there, then the certs are going to get generated. So you can kind of just move them, just like what Lucas is describing. And I hadn't like read thoroughly through Peter's modifications, but this stuff is merged. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like wondering if this is something that we should expect, like when we're to be implementing. You know, like nobody really mentioned it until Peter was like, by the way, I did this thing for the API server to support auto rotation of certs on upgrade, and it's merged. And is this something that, like, is this the way that we want to do this? Should I put in a PR, like an additional PR for the etcd TLS stuff? How do we want this to work, I guess?
I think for the time being, the answer is yes. The problem we've had with like the operator, which could have just solved this problem by rotating the certs as secrets and doing automatic updates when you change things, is that there's other thorny problems with running the etcd operator. Right? So once you get to self-hosting, you have the magic of being able to just update your secrets on the fly, right? But that comes with all kinds of security constraints. And I know that there's been issues along the way with SIG auth. I think it's totally reasonable for the time being, and people can talk against it. Maybe I should loop, if I would probably loop in Matt Moyer on the conversation, and his handles at Matt Moyer, to talk about it. You can also just at SIG auth, and they can, but that's a thorny beast. I would loop in Eric Chang, Lucas, and Matt Moyer. And those are the three folks that could give you quick turnkey feedback, and they're part of SIG auth. But we did add, I know that Lucas did add the cert rotation on upgrades because of expiration dates that were kind of defaulted in previous versions.
Yeah, I mean, it's like by default, it's a year, right? Also, I just have other questions that I don't really know the answer to, like how long is our CA expiration and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would definitely talk with, again, Moyer, Eric Chang, and Lucas on Slack with the defaults there. They're the ones who magically crafted the defaults.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think for now, even just talking with Peter yesterday, he was saying like this was definitely, it's not like part of the MVP that we need for etcd TLS, but I think that like if we don't implement this now, then we're going to be in the same boat, you know, a year from now, like where nobody's thought about it or volunteered to work on it, and like now our certs are going to expire. But yeah, the interesting thing is that it only rotates automatically on upgrade, right? Like there's no way for somebody to just run a command like.
There is a command, I swear there is, but it's only for the API server that I'm aware of right now.
Oh, okay.
And I think, again, talk with Moyer on the details there, because I'm pretty sure they added the modification for the command.
Okay.
And if it doesn't exist there's pieces of the infrastructure to make this happen.
Sweet.
Right.
Cool.
But yes, we should absolutely have a separate subcommand that allows just the rotation of the certs. That's totally a reasonable thing to me. Are there any other questions on that topic?
I have a question on the PR that I went through very quickly, and I saw that most of the part of the PR is for handling the extra certificate names. And I'm wondering what is the use case for adding these additional names when we are generating a certificate only for localhost?
You're talking about the extra sans.
Yes.
Array. You could pass with the etcd extra args array. You could override the listen address from localhost to like eth0 or something public, and now you would have a publicly addressable etcd interface. But then the cert's not going to have a SAN. And so that gives the user a chance to supply like the node host name or potentially like a proxied load balancer.
So we are.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I will go through this again. So we are giving the user the capability to install a local etcd cluster accessible from outside.
Yeah, and then also I could kind of see as well that with the manual HA instructions for using kubeadm with static pods, currently we have a restriction where you are not able to use the automatically managed etcd. But if you were to pass the right flags in, you could even add a discovery URL, and kubeadm could potentially stand up static pods on multiple masters that would then talk to each other. And that would also give the user the ability to, like, you're going to need to put the SANs in there so that they can they can communicate properly. For instance, like a etcd1 would need to be able to contact etcd2 at the master's host address or whatever fronting load balancer is in front of it.
Putting etcd behind a load balancer is putting a hot HA it becomes funky, right? But that's a separate constraint for people.
Yeah, I just put it in there because we have the same options for the API server for kind of the same user use cases, and it allows you to bridge together like a more complex structure than is suggested by the defaults in kubeadm. You could use those extra user flags to configure a valid like SSL configuration on etcd and then like string it all together with multiple nodes.
Yep.
This is also installer could consume like a higher order one.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions, comments? Great. The last bit which I wanted to discuss today are self-hosting, high availability, and upgrades. One of which was the documentation for upgrades in HA, and the second which is the HA one. But the last bit that we haven't yet discussed was whether or not there's anybody who's interested in helping to work on the last hurdles for self-hosting. This becomes super important for long-term viability of upgrades to get us out of the conundrum of having to go to each master node eventually in the future to do upgrades. It's a way easier path forwards to manage for clusters.
Yeah, and what are the outstanding things that are known?
The biggest thing that we have to deal with, as mentioned in the last call, is the potential checkpointing of secrets. There already exists the checkpoint facilities inside of the kubelet. We did that over the course of a couple of releases, and that will checkpoint a pod to local disk, and it's a optional parameter to the kubelet. But we need to be able to promote this from an alpha grade feature to something that's beta supported, as well as add the checkpointing capability for secrets. I have all the information I need to point somebody at the right location, but I don't have the bandwidth to execute because you need to see it all the way through the encabulator to make this happen. And this kind of lends itself well to people who want to contribute to the community but haven't done so and are looking for a way to actively make meaningful impact or to earn maintainer rights if they're interested, because it's a non-trivial amount of work.
So it's kind of like the secrets are in etcd and they would have to be written to disk?
Yes. The secrets are temporarily encrypted and written to disk for being able to bring back a control plane underneath two failure conditions. One is a single master self-hosted cluster, where if that goes down without having the secrets, it doesn't know what to do. So it would checkpoint those secrets to disk, and then it would be able to restart the control plane on a restart. The second is a whole data center failure condition, where you have multiple nodes and everything just goes to crap.
Mm-hmm. So the secrets are essentially TLS certs and such, right?
Yes.
And yeah, because they would be expected to start on the same nodes, so they then become sort of pseudo API objects, right? They're not exactly API objects to a certain extent because in a way now source of truth is on disk list in some cases, isn't it? Which is kind of weird, but
from what I understand, the pods need to be checkpointed as well for this to work. But am I right on that, Tim?
Yes, you are right, and that capability already exists.
Yeah.
So it would be augmenting the original PR. It'd be augmenting the the capability that exists to add secrets checkpointing.
And this is local to all of the control plane components, so it's not just the etcd pods. It's going to be the API server pods. It's going to be the kubelet pods and everything.
We've decided that it only needs to occur on just the API server. As long as the API server can come back, everything else can come back afterwards. So you only need to add, the way checkpointing works is you add an annotation to the API server daemon set pod. That annotation then flows to the kubelet. The kubelet then decides that because it has the annotation, it writes that pod to disk. A similar thing would occur for API server secrets, right? Which would eventually be serving certs, right? And
basically, sorry, help me. I'm just missing some pieces here because I'm not really understanding the life cycle of maybe how a secret gets mounted in the template class. When a pod gets initialized, then is there an extra interaction that authorizes the pod to get the secret mounted?
Yes. So part of the life cycle of a pod on the node side is to mount any volumes for that pod, and that also includes secrets that are referenced. Secrets are basically volume mounts into a pod itself. So you can have explicit mounts, you can have config maps, you can have secrets. All, PVC claims, secrets, and config maps are all a form of mounting into a pod.
But then, so when we checkpoint a pod, are we checkpointing volumes but not secrets?
No, because we're explicitly not adding any volume mounts for the API server. So we're being very judicious about what we add. Or you could have a host volume mount, which allows you to basically say, I have this well-defined path on this host. I don't need to checkpoint it. It just gets mounted from the host directly into the pod. And that is the escape hatch that we have been debating upon wanting to do, is do the host volume mount for self-hosting.
Yeah, it could almost, I mean, it could almost be like just a backup volume. Like you could still use the secret, still rotate the secret, and then it would be synced with the host volume mount. But that definitely doesn't sound. I don't know if it's cleaner or not than the secret checkpointing. I mean, I guess it'll be in plain text.
Yeah, I think this is where we need somebody to drive home this last bit that has been the thorn in the side to make a final decision on how we want to do this, right?
Or more, sorry, just the question of like this pod checkpointing feature, is this something that other users have expressed a desire for outside of like keeping the control plane up?
Yes, but we've explicitly, in order to make, checkpointing is an overloaded word, right? And depending upon your legacy and history in grid-based systems, it has multiple connotations and meanings. And in order for us to scope it down so that way people don't flip their lid in talking about checkpointing, we have explicitly called it bootstrap checkpointing. So that is only for the control plane. Now, ultimately, there are the notions of long-running jobs that want to be able to write state to a local disk and be able to retroactively start up from that point in time using technologies like DMTCP or other things. And that's a generic checkpointing thing, is that you might have been further down the state path and not necessarily written your things to a volume mount and want to be able to checkpoint it and then recover from where you were last were. That's a far more complicated problem than we want to even touch. That's up to SIG node to decide if they want to deal with that. So this is specifically focused down to bootstrap recovery.
So these PRs and the features that we're talking about is really just intended for the control plane.
Yes. And in order for us to get buy-in and to get those pieces done in the last cycle, we had to make sure that we explicitly stated it as such, just to make sure that, you know, people who want to eventually work on checkpointing can add those features separately.
Where would the encryption and decryption, or where would the decryption key be stored?
They use the Kubernetes certs to be able to encrypt. Now, it's debatable, like I mentioned before, whether or not we want to use host volume mounts, but then there's this other question of what do we want to do with cert rotation? Because if the API server certs are stored as secrets, it makes cert rotation way easier, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what I was kind of getting at with, like, could we shim the functionality just into the API server and have the API server load from a secret, but then sync to disk and fall back to disk?
There's multiple things here that we could handle. Like we could have a daemon set, you know, that periodically does the rotation on disk, right, and does the same host volume mount. There's a number of ways we can do this, but what we need to do is enumerate the list of possibilities and just pick one at this point. I personally am a little skeptical of adding secrets checkpointing. But we need to have a solution for self-hosting that allows for cert rotation than host volume mount stuff. So it's basically finishing off this last piece of the puzzle. And Lucas already has some of the pieces in place for using secrets. That stuff has been added a while ago. So if there is a volunteer who wants to help work on this, I can get all the pieces aligned. And what I'll probably do is open up an issue again too with regards to this, get all the history together in a single location and look for folks who want to help drive home this last bit. Were you going to say something, Ilya?
Oh no, I was just well, I'm thinking, you know, for me personally, I'd have to think about this a little bit. So I wouldn't just say that I'd take it, right? And I think that's a similar kind of thing for just about anybody thinking of this.
Yeah, it's a complicated problem that has a lot of history. Like everything that we're dealing with now is one of those things where there's many ways to slice it, and we have history behind it. So what I think needs to happen now is for me to try to help write down some of that history and some of those issues and legacy behind it, so that way other folks can jump in and execute against it.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand the whole motivation with self-hosting, but I also understand some of the reasons for not doing it. And for example, you know, essentially, if we do make Kubernetes really well at running Kubernetes, that's kind of it's an odd thing to do. It doesn't seem like. I mean, to me, it does. With one hat on, I could look at it that way and think, well, we've made self-hosting work very well, but now we just optimize the system to run itself.
Well, the biggest motivation there, the primary driver behind self-hosting is seamless upgrades. Right, because then you could use upgrade strategy, rolling updates to basically rejigger your entire control plane. And because they're running on kubelets, you can asynchronously update the kubelet, and then modifying your control plane just becomes a rolling update. And that's the primary driver, is the use case of UX of upgrades and making them simple.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that. It's just sort of with different hats on, I can think of this problem differently. But part of me also thinks, what about if we had a way of telling kubelet what to do other than just running static pods that are given as files, right? So if we sort of had some kind of API in kubelet that would allow us to do this, and then we could implement something on top of that would allow us to do that through the API server and all that.
That already exists, actually. The kubelet has a well-defined API as of several releases ago. That's actually supported in beta, I think.
Because there was a few read-only things in there, but is there like an API that you could write to?
Yes, you can use the kubelet as a mechanism for basically executing arbitrary pods in your environment, provided they're scoped down, right? That meaning of scoped down is the kubelet will inherently pick apart a pod and try to mount in other things, which requires an API server. So it has to be a very special cased pod that's been constructed in order for you to execute against it.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, maybe I could catch up on what's there as well. It just doesn't seem like there is particular need to make it all extremely first class. You would fundamentally probably treat the system in a slightly different way than you treat the applications that run on it. So that there's already a natural boundary there that it doesn't have to have all the same features that we have for running applications, I think.
Well, I think what the primary driver is, to give some history too, is that Bootkube does a lot of this capability. And what we're kind of doing here is distilling down and making them first-class citizens within the core. And some of the stuff that Bootkube does is it does its own separate checkpointing, which is not actually built in as part of the kubelet recovery startup stuff. So as a result, we're trying to first-class a lot of the features that existed in Bootkube into the core. But as we do that first classing, rethink some of the problems that are inherent with the solution that they came up with, right? And because,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because the problem is semi-fractal, there are many ways to slice it, right? So that's the reason why this whole separate meeting exists, right? Is because those three things, high availability, upgrades, and self-hosting, have many ways to slice it. And the one last bit we need to manage with recovery of self-hosting is managing of the secrets and having an opinion on it.
Yeah. Well, I just sort of, it's I mean, the way I think of it is like, it's always not a bad idea to sort of question the decisions that have been made in the past and reconsider before we've gone and spent like a year trying to make this work nicely and securely. So yeah, but like I'll think about it a bit more. I haven't thought of it recently for quite a while. Maybe it's a good thing actually, and I wasn't aware of the new kubelet API. So take a look at that. What is it? What is it titled? Is it just kubelet API or?
I'd have to dig up the details, but it's actually stored. The API itself is stored underneath the kubelet package subdirectory, and it has its own separate API. Yep. I don't have any other topics to discuss. What I have action items that I want to follow up on, one of which is to write down the history of some of the bits around self-hosting and try to distill them down. And I have an action item for next week to go through the backlog of kubeadm, so they kind of mash up right there. If anyone's interested, I will post links into this document with the history there, and we can discuss it in further detail perhaps next week.
Yeah, I have just some quick contributing questions, which is just about the cleanliness of this etcd PR. Tim, you mentioned squashing. Do you think it's cool to just squash that entire PR into a single commit?
So typical, either break up the PR into multiple commits if they're atomic that can be merged separately, Otherwise, if you put up a PR, a process for upstream is typically one PR for your thing in case somebody needs to revert it, along with any API, any generated things as a separate commit. So typical commits that have any generated updates have two commits, one for the code changes, second for the generated changes. And if you can, if you can parcel it up into incremental pieces that can be merged separately, that is always beneficial. So larger PRs are kind of discouraged in favor of atomic, smaller PRs, just because of the amount of bandwidth and the amount of people we have as reviewers in the entire chain.
So that's good. The second question I have on that is when you guys run across typos, some of which could be like pretty pervasive throughout the code base. So I had like some nitpicks on like my like some of my code, and then some of it's calling code that has typos in it. Like, do you guys wait usually for a merge, or like do you base a PR on top of your existing PR and like have them merged, like have them block each other, or
lump the typos together based upon functional area, right? And then have that merged as one thing, as a single PR.
Okay.
Anytime I get just as a general community thing, anytime I get a contributor who gives me 30 PRs for typos across the whole code base, I refuse to review their PRs anymore. That's not a joke, because the amount of time that is expended just seeing PRs through the cycle is inordinately large, right? Because you have to babysit a PR sometimes to get it through the testing process. And that becomes a large amount of time. So if you have typos, lump them together into functional areas. Like if you have typos that pertain to kubeadm, stick it as just a kubeadm PR, because otherwise you'll have multiple reviewers that have to hit different functional areas. And I can only approve certain areas, and then you'll have to get approvers from the other area as well in order to make that go. So
but you suggest not having this in the etcd TLS PR.
You can lump it together,
Okay.
but just try to make things atomic where possible. Right? So sometimes the random walk is faster than the straight line. Right? So if you can break up any large PR into separate atomic things that can be merged separately, that might actually occur faster. I have your PR to finish reviewing on the backlog, but there's many things, right?
Yeah. There's timelines for everything. I'm not pushing. So
yeah.
Cool. Okay. Those are helpful. Thanks. I'll probably just tag it on as a commit to the existing PR.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the group or issues that folks want to address? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, thanks everybody. I will follow on with updates, and next week you'll probably see a bunch of modifications to the backlog for kubeadm. So if you're interested in contributing, we'll have a bunch of getting started PRs, as well as these much more thornier ones for folks to talk about. Thanks everybody.